Okay, hi everyone, this is the Métis Mix-up, where we put a Métis spin on a recipe we already know and love. So today we're going to be doing Italian wedding soup, and the spin is going to be using ground buffalo. So I'm not going to be measuring. This is a really big pot of soup we're making because it is our Métis week open house, so this is going to be a lot of soup. You probably don't need to make this much at home, so there will be no measurements, it's all from here.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is get my veggies prepped for a mirepoix. A mirepoix is the basis of most soups, so that's celery, carrots, onions, and I just peeled my carrots and finely diced them. As you can see in the back there, I do use a garbage bowl. I forget what cooking show I saw this on as a kid. Maybe it was Rachel Ray, I don't know, but it is a game changer. You just keep all of your garbage in a bowl, and then it makes it easy to put it into the compost or the garbage and makes it a lot easier on cleanup. Then same thing, I'm just going to cut my celery up. On the more broad ends, like the bottoms of the celery, I do cut down the middle just so that we're getting like an even chop, because the tops of the celery are more narrow. So I just do that and then go through, dice the whole thing. Make sure you wash celery pretty well. The bottoms tend to get a lot of dirt on them. My favorite way to cut an onion is to cut the top off, then cut it again, and then follow those stripes that an onion naturally has. Cut along those, and then cut the opposite direction to get perfectly fine little cubes. And then this way you can kind of control how big your dicing is as well, based on like your spacing when you're cutting vertically along with the lines and when you're cutting horizontally across as well. It's really easy, and it's probably the fastest way to do it. Off camera, I washed the parsley pretty well. I rinsed it off, shook it off, and then used a tea towel to kind of press it dry. And then I just cut this into a fine dice. This is going to be used in the meatballs, so you do want it quite fine. I pre-washed the kale off camera, and then I used a tea towel to kind of like roll it up and push the water out. And then I am going to take out the stem, because you don't really want to eat that. I think that's what puts people off kale, is because the stem is so fibrous, it's kind of hard to chew. So I took that out, and then I'm rolling the kale up so I can just thinly slice it as efficiently as possible. And then I just cut again just to make sure it's in small bite-sized pieces. I'd recommend using garlic, like the garlic in a jar, but if you got to do it this way, push down with your knife on the garlic, and then the skin just pops right off. So for the meatballs, I used pre-made bison burgers from the butcher. Those come pre-seasoned and like with the binders in them already, so you don't need to add any eggs or breadcrumbs. I think it's a great hack. It cuts down on the time you need and the ingredients. So all I'm gonna do for these meatballs is just season them. So I am adding parsley, garlic, onion powder, chili flakes, Italian seasoning. And I did forget the Parmesan. You can see it in the back there. I didn't add it. If I went back in time, I would add it, or if I was going to make this again. It would add a lot of flavor and some fat. I ended up just adding another egg just to make sure that everything would be like very binded. I didn't want the meatballs falling apart in the soup. So once that egg is in there, I'm just going in with my hands and mashing it all together. I'm using gloves because I have long nails. I don't want to be unhygienic, but you don't need to use gloves. Like if you're cooking at home, don't use gloves. It's better for the environment. Just wash your hands. As I was mixing, it didn't look seasoned enough, so I added a little bit more of all the seasonings I added previously. I ended up adding a little bit of paprika, as like this is frozen meat, so I mean it looks like frozen meat, so I wanted it to have a little bit more color. The paprika won't add much taste, just a little bit of color. Once everything is well combined, I did go and smell it. Disclaimer, I didn't exhale on this, just a quick like just to make sure that I could smell the aromas of the seasoning that I put it, and that everything smelled balanced and that it smelled good. So now I'm gonna roll the meatballs. In hindsight, I think that I would roll the meatballs a lot smaller than I did, like half the size. So then each bite of soup, you're gonna get a mini meatball, and every bite is a good bite. And it'll also cut down on the cooking time. I was on a pretty big time crunch when I was making this, so this would have helped me out a little bit, having them cook faster. I actually started this part before I did the meatballs, just so they could get a longer chance to cook down. I like to do my mirepoix this way and let it cook in the pan with oil first, just because I think it adds a lot of flavor to cook them down together and get like a little caramelization on the onions and carrots. You totally don't have to do this. This is the way I do it, so I'm showing you the way I do it. But you could just put it in the pan and add your broth. But I don't know, I like it this way. Adds a lot of flavor. I cook this down until like it kind of gets stuck on the bottom, and then I use the broth to deglaze it. The meatballs are all done. They're ready to go into the oven. The oven's preheated to 400 degrees. I just am putting these in here. I'm not sure how long I put them in there for, but I'm gonna guess around 15 minutes, maybe less. Because I was on such a time crunch for this, because I was cooking for our Métis week, I'm just pre-making the broth. So I put the water on the stove to boil, and then I added chicken bouillon powder. I did not measure this. I just relied totally on my sense of smell to make sure that it smelled like the broth was strong enough. And I brought this to a boil, so then when I added it to my other ingredients, it wouldn't slow down the cook time at all. What I'm doing here with the kale is totally unnecessary, as we will be boiling the kale, but I know people don't like kale, so I wanted to include this tip. Massage it with oil and it breaks it down so it's easier to chew and it's less bitter. I didn't time the meatballs, but I know they're cooked when I checked on them because the tops are brown, so I just took them out of the oven at this point. I always like to add my seasoning to my pan when it just has oil in it before I add any liquids. I feel like the oil makes the spices more intense or more flavorful. I don't know what it is. It could be in my head, but that's how I do it. So I put those in. I was Italian seasoning, a bay leaf, paprika, onion powder, and some chili flakes, and I just let those cook in there while stirring until I could smell the seasonings. And then I added some chicken broth. I used a carton and the broth I prepared before, just because it's what I had. I wanted to get it used up. And then I make a mistake. Don't do this. I forgot the Parmesan cheese when I was doing the meatballs, so I thought I would rectify this by adding it into the soup. Don't do it. It just clumps together. I knew this was going to happen, but I thought I'd try it anyways. So all it did was clump together and I could kind of pick it out. I don't know if there's a way to make it work, but it definitely doesn't need it. You can add it as a garnish after. And if you do it properly, this Parmesan cheese will be in the meatballs. I added in the rest of my chicken broth, and then I'm just gonna put the meatballs in. I used tongs and I just kind of put them in there, gave it a stir. Off camera I did add some more paprika. I just added this until the broth was a color I felt was appetizing and it looked vibrant. So you don't need to do that because again it won't add a lot of flavor, but I do like making sure it's visually appealing. So I like to make sure things are colorful and it looks good. After I put those meatballs in, I let it come to a boil and then I added in my kale. I'm just putting it in, stirring it in. It'll cook as the soup simmers. I let everything cook together, and once it got to a rolling boil, I added my pastina in. I do think I added too much pastina, so I ended up adding some more broth to it just to get the ratio right. Those pastas are so tiny that they don't take long to cook, so I just let that boil for a minute, and once they looked cooked, I had someone come taste it because I actually don't eat meat, so I have no idea how this tasted. So they told me it needed more salt, so I added that in, and we're all done.